The wind screamed across the frozen valley as Elira's paws sank deeper into the snow. Her lungs burned with every breath. Behind her, she could still hear them, the pack she had called family only hours before, standing at the ridge and watching her stumble away into the storm. Nobody moved to stop what was happening. Nobody called her back. Elira had been born into the hollow pine pack during the harshest winter anyone could remember, and from that first breath, she had been marked as different. Her fur held a pale silver color that no one else in the pack carried, and the elders whispered that such a color was a sign of misfortune. She grew up hearing those whispers everywhere she went. In the training grounds, in the feeding circle, even in the den where her own mother, Meredith, slept beside her every night, without ever once defending her in front of others. The pack had been struggling for 3 seasons. The deer herds had moved further north than anyone could remember. The rivers had frozen early, and 2 long hunts had come back empty. Fear does strange things to a group of people, and fear does even stranger things to wolves who believe in old signs and older superstitions. When the alpha, a graying, tired wolf named Bram, called a gathering on a night when frost coated every tree in the forest, everyone in the pack already sensed what kind of night it would become. Elira sat near the back of the circle, her ears low, her eyes fixed on the fire pit where the flames struggled against the wind. Cade, the alpha's chosen heir, stood near his father, with his chest puffed out, and his eyes gleaming with something that looked almost like excitement. He had never liked Elira. From the time they were pups, he had made it clear that he saw her as an outsider who had somehow slipped into the pack by mistake. "The hunts fail because something among us carries bad fortune," Cade said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "We all know who came into this world with fur, the color of ash and bone. We all remember the winter she was born, the same winter 3 of our elders did not survive." A murmur rolled through the gathered wolves. Elira felt her stomach twist into a hard knot. She looked toward her mother, hoping for even a flicker of protest, but Meredith kept her gaze fixed on the ground, her jaw tight, her body still. "This is nonsense," said an older voice from the side of the circle. It belonged to Fenna, one of the pack's healers, a wolf who had always shown Elira small kindnesses when no one else was looking. "The hunts fail because the herds have moved. That is nature, not curses." "And yet the herds never moved before she was born," Cade snapped back. "Ask yourself why the ground itself seems to reject us since that winter." Bram, the alpha, said nothing for a long moment. He was not a cruel wolf by nature, but he was exhausted, worn down by seasons of hardship, and desperate for anything that might explain why his pack kept losing ground while other packs thrived. Desperation makes leaders listen to voices they might otherwise ignore. "We cannot keep going as we have," Bram finally said, his voice heavy. "If there is even a chance that removing this misfortune could change our luck, then for the good of the pack, we must consider it." Elira's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to remind them that she had done nothing wrong, that she had hunted well every season she was allowed to hunt, that she had helped care for the pups when illness swept through the den 2 winters ago. But her voice caught in her throat, and before she could find it again, Osric, the eldest of the pack elders, rose to his feet. "There is a way to test this," Osric said, his voice dry and cracking with age. "Let her prove her innocence, through the old trial. Send her into the storm tonight. If she survives until dawn, and the pack's fortune does not shift, then we will know the truth. If she does not survive, then perhaps nature itself has spoken." The words hung in the freezing air like a blade. Elira looked around the circle, searching every face for someone who might object, someone who might remind the others that this so-called trial was nothing but a slow, cruel way of casting her out to die. But fear had already spread through the pack like sickness, and fear makes people, and wolves, willing to believe almost anything, if it means they might be spared themselves. Bram closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, something in his expression had hardened, as if he had already decided to let this happen, and simply needed permission from his own conscience. "Let it be done," he said quietly. "Elira will face the storm alone tonight." Elira felt the ground shift beneath her, though nothing had physically moved. She looked at her mother one final time, silently begging her to say something, anything. Meredith's eyes met hers for only a heartbeat, before sliding away again, filled with something that might have been shame, though shame did nothing to stop what was happening. Two younger wolves Alira had grown up training beside, stepped forward at Cade's signal and flanked her sides, not touching her, but making it clear that she was expected to walk toward the tree line without resistance. She thought about running, about fighting, about screaming at all of them that this was wrong. But something inside her, some quiet, stubborn part of her spirit, refused to give Cade the satisfaction of watching her break down in front of the entire pack. Instead, she rose to her feet, lifted her chin, and walked toward the edge of the clearing on her own, without being pushed, without being dragged. If they were going to send her away, she would at least leave with whatever dignity she had left. The forest beyond Hollow Pine territory was a place spoken about only in warning stories, told to pups who misbehaved. It was called the Frostfang Stretch, a wide expanse of pine and ice, where temperatures dropped low enough to freeze a wolf's blood within hours if they were caught without shelter. No pack claimed that land, because no pack could survive there for long. It existed as an empty, silent warning at the edge of every territory nearby. As Alira crossed the invisible line marking the border of her home, she felt the wind change. It grew sharper, colder, hungrier. Snow swirled around her paws in small, violent spirals, and within a few hundred steps, she could barely make out the shapes of the trees ahead of her. She glanced back once, just once, and saw the last flickers of the pack's fire pit, glowing faintly behind her, before the storm swallowed even that small comfort. She kept walking because stopping meant giving up, and some stubborn ember inside her chest refused to let that happen. Her paws grew numb first, then her legs, then her sides. The wind cut through her fur, as though it were nothing at all, finding every gap, every weakness, driving cold straight into her bones. She told herself with each step that she only needed to find some kind of shelter, a fallen tree, a rock outcrop, anything that could break the wind even slightly. Hours passed, though in the storm it was impossible to measure time by anything except the growing heaviness in her limbs. Her thoughts began to blur at the edges. She remembered running through these same forests as a pup, chasing after other young wolves during warmer seasons, laughing in the way only young creatures who do not yet understand cruelty can laugh. She remembered her mother teaching her how to track scent trails, praising her sharp nose even as other adults in the pack looked at her with suspicion. She remembered small moments of kindness, scattered among years of coldness, and she wondered, as her legs finally gave out beneath her, whether those moments had been enough to make her life worth living, even if it ended here in the snow. She fell into a drift near the base of an old pine tree, her body curling instinctively to conserve whatever warmth remained. Her breathing slowed, her eyes grew heavy. She thought, distantly, that this was probably what dying felt like, a slow fading rather than a sudden end, and strangely, it did not feel as frightening as she had always imagined it would. The last thing she registered before the darkness closed in completely was a sound, faint and far away, carried on the wind. It might have been her imagination. It might have been the storm playing tricks on a mind already slipping toward unconsciousness. But it sounded almost like the low, rhythmic pattern of paws moving through snow, drawing steadily closer. Alira's mind drifted into blackness, and the storm raged on above her still body, indifferent to whether she lived or died, indifferent to the pack that had cast her out, indifferent to everything except its own relentless, freezing fury. Far behind her, back within the safety of Hollow Pine territory, the gathered wolves slowly returned to their dens, murmuring among themselves about what they had just done, some already trying to convince themselves it had been necessary, others staying silent because silence was easier than facing what their fear had allowed to happen. Meredith did not sleep that night. She lay awake in the den, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to admit, quietly, privately, that she had failed her daughter in a way she might never be able to undo. Cade, on the other hand, slept soundly, believing that the pack's misfortune had finally been dealt with, unaware that the storm he had sent Alira into was about to become the beginning of something far greater than anything he could imagine, something that would return to Hollow Pine territory in a form none of them were prepared to face. The wind continued to howl through the Frostfang Stretch as the night deepened, burying the small silver shape curled beneath the old pine tree under a growing blanket of snow, while somewhere close by, unseen eyes watched the drifting flakes and moved steadily closer through the storm. The cold had stopped hurting, and that frightened her more than the pain itself. Alira floated somewhere between sleep and something deeper, aware only of a dull heaviness pressing on her chest, and a faint golden warmth flickering somewhere far above her, like sunlight trying to reach the bottom of a frozen lake. Voices reached her first, low and unfamiliar, speaking in careful tones. "Her breathing is shallow, but she is still with us," said one voice, calm and steady, belonging to someone clearly used to giving orders. "Keep the fire close to her side. Do not let it touch her fur, but do not let it fade either." Alira tried to open her eyes, but her body refused to obey. Time slipped strangely after that, moments of warmth and quiet murmuring blending into longer stretches of darkness. She dreamed of snow, of her mother's silent face, of Cade's voice ringing across the gathering circle. She dreamed of falling and never quite landing. When she finally woke fully, she found herself inside a den unlike any she had known before. The walls were lined with dried moss and soft bark, and a small fire burned steadily near the entrance, its smoke curling upward through a narrow gap in the rock ceiling above. A thick pelt covered her body, and beside her sat an older female wolf with silver-streaked fur and eyes the color of amber, watching her with quiet patience. "You are awake," the wolf said, her voice carrying warmth despite its firmness. "That is more than I expected 2 nights ago." Alira's throat felt raw, and it took her several attempts before words came out in a hoarse whisper. "Where am I?" "Somewhere far from wherever it was that left you to die in the snow," the older wolf answered simply. "My name is Sorka. My pack found you buried near the old pine trees at the edge of the Frostfang stretch, a few hours later, and there would have been nothing left to find." Alira tried to sit up, but pain flared through her limbs, and Sorka gently pressed a paw against her shoulder, guiding her back down. "Rest first. Questions can wait until your body has caught up with your mind." Over the following days, Alira slowly regained her strength within the unfamiliar den. She learned that Sorka led a small pack of wolves who lived far from any established territory, wolves who had, for various reasons, been pushed out of other packs and found their way to one another over the years. They called themselves the Ember Pack, named for the way they had managed to keep some spark of life alive, despite everything that had tried to extinguish them. A young wolf named Talia often brought Alira food and water during her recovery, her tail wagging with obvious curiosity despite her attempts to appear calm and composed. "Sorka does not usually bring in strangers," Talia admitted one afternoon, settling down beside Alira's resting place. "She said something about you felt different the moment she found you. I do not fully understand what she meant, but she is rarely wrong about these things." "Different how?" Alira asked, though a small, uncertain part of her already suspected the answer might connect somehow to the very thing her old pack had feared about her. Talia only shrugged, clearly unsure herself, and changed the subject to describe the daily routines of the Ember Pack, how they hunted in smaller, quieter groups, how they moved locations every few seasons to avoid drawing attention from larger territorial packs, how Sorka had built something resembling a real family out of wolves who had nowhere else to belong. As the days turned into weeks, Alira grew stronger, and with her strength returned a sharper awareness of her surroundings. She noticed how Sorka carried herself with an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than simple leadership experience. She noticed the way the other wolves in the Ember Pack treated Sorka, with a respect that bordered on reverence, though Sorka herself never demanded such treatment. One evening, as autumn winds began replacing the last traces of winter, Sorka invited Alira to walk with her along a ridge overlooking a wide, quiet valley. The sky above them stretched in shades of deep orange and purple as the sun dropped toward the horizon, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. "You have questions," Sorka finally said, breaking the silence. "I can see them sitting behind your eyes every time you look at me." Alira hesitated before answering. "Why did you save me? You did not know me. For all you knew, I could have deserved whatever happened to me." Sorka let out a low, quiet sound that might have been a laugh, though it held no real humor in it. I have seen enough cruelty in my years to recognize the difference between a wolf who deserves punishment and a wolf who has simply become convenient to blame. The moment I found you in that snow, I knew which one you were. How could you know that, just by looking at me? Sorka turned to face her fully, her amber eyes studying Elira with an intensity that made her want to look away, though something kept her rooted in place. Because I recognized something in your scent, something old, something I have not encountered in many, many years. Tell me, Elira, has anyone in your birth pack ever spoken about the old bloodlines, the ones said to have existed before the territorial packs split into the divisions we know today? Elira frowned, searching her memory. The elders sometimes told stories about ancient wolves who ruled over many packs at once, long before anyone alive today was born. But those were just stories told to pups before sleep, nothing more. Many stories carry more truth than people realize, Sorka said quietly. There was once a bloodline known among the old packs as the Silverback line. Wolves born with fur the color of frost and eyes that could shift between colors, depending on their strength and mood. They were said to carry an ability few other wolves possessed, the power to unite scattered packs under a single, fair leadership, ending years of conflict between rival territories. Over generations, as wars and disease spread through the wolflands, that bloodline was believed to have died out entirely. Elira's pulse quickened as she listened, an uncomfortable prickling sensation spreading across her skin. Why are you telling me this? Sorka stepped closer, lowering her voice even though no one else stood nearby to overhear. Because when I found you in that snow, half frozen and barely breathing, your scent carried traces of that same old bloodline. Traces I have not encountered since I was younger than Talia is now. Your pack did not exile you because you brought misfortune, Elira. They exiled you because they sensed something in you they could not understand, something that frightened them precisely because it was powerful. Elira shook her head slowly, unable to fully process what she was hearing. That cannot be true. I am nobody. I was the weakest hunter in my pack most seasons. I could barely hold my place among the others. Power does not always show itself early, Sorka said gently. Sometimes it waits, hidden, until the right circumstances allow it to awaken. I believe that is exactly what happened to you in that storm. You should not have survived what you went through. The fact that you did tells me something inside you is far stronger than anyone, including yourself, currently realizes. For a long moment, Elira said nothing, staring out over the darkening valley, as Sorka's words settled slowly into her mind. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything as an old wolf's fanciful theory, a comforting story, meant to ease the pain of what had happened to her. But another part of her, a part she had spent her entire life trying to ignore, whispered that Sorka might be telling the truth. If what you say is real, Elira finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, then what happens now? Sorka's expression softened, though her eyes remained steady and serious. Now, you decide whether you want to spend the rest of your life running from what you are, or whether you want to learn to understand it fully. I will not force this path onto you, but if you choose to walk it, I promise to guide you every step of the way, for as long as I am able. Elira looked out over the valley once more, thinking of the pack that had left her to die, thinking of her mother's silent face, thinking of Cade's cruel satisfaction as she had walked toward the storm. Something hardened inside her chest. Not quite anger, not quite determination, but something close to both. Teach me, she said finally, turning to meet Sorka's gaze without flinching. Whatever this is inside me, I want to understand it. I do not want to be afraid of myself anymore, and I do not want anyone else to ever again decide my worth for me. Sorka nodded slowly, a small, proud smile touching the corners of her mouth. Then we begin tomorrow, at first light. What lies ahead will not be easy, Elira. It will test every part of who you are. But I believe, in time, you will become someone the world has not seen in a very long time. As the last light faded from the sky above the valley, the two wolves stood together on the ridge, one carrying the weight of an old, nearly forgotten legacy, the other carrying the quiet hope that legacy might finally have found its way home. Neither of them could have fully imagined, in that quiet evening moment, just how far that path would eventually lead, or how many lives it would one day change. True to her word, Sorka woke Elira before dawn the next morning, nudging her gently awake, while the rest of the Ember Pack still slept soundly in their dens. The air outside carried a sharp autumn chill, and mist clung low to the ground as the two wolves made their way to a wide, flat clearing, hidden deep within a ring of tall pines. "This will be your training ground," Sorka said, circling the clearing slowly. "Away from prying eyes, away from distraction. What we do here stays between us, until you are ready for others to witness it." Illyra nodded, though nervousness churned in her stomach. "I do not even know where to begin. I do not know what this power inside me is supposed to feel like, or how to reach it." "Then we start with the basics, the same way every wolf begins, regardless of bloodline," Sorka replied. "Strength of body first, strength of mind after. Power without control is nothing but a danger to yourself and everyone around you." The following weeks blurred into a demanding rhythm of exhausting exercises. Sorka drilled Illyra through endurance runs across uneven terrain, forcing her to push her body far beyond what she believed herself capable of. Some mornings, Illyra collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, long before Sorka called an end to the session, her legs trembling, her chest heaving. "Again," Sorka would say, standing patiently at the edge of the clearing, her expression calm but firm, "your body must learn that exhaustion is not the same as failure." Slowly, painfully, Illyra's endurance began to improve. Runs that once left her collapsed on the ground eventually became routine. Her muscles grew stronger, her breathing steadier, her movements sharper and more controlled. Alongside physical conditioning, Sorka introduced her to combat techniques, teaching her how to read an opponent's movements, how to anticipate attacks before they happened, how to use quickness and precision rather than relying purely on brute strength. "You will never be the largest wolf in any confrontation," Sorka explained during one training session, circling Illyra with careful, measured steps. "But size means little if your mind moves faster than your opponent's body. Watch their shoulders, not their eyes. Shoulders reveal intention long before an attack actually begins." Illyra absorbed every lesson with fierce determination, driven by memories of her old pack's cruelty, though Sorka was careful to guide that determination away from bitterness and towards something more constructive. "Anger can fuel you for a short while," Sorka warned one afternoon, after Illyra had thrown herself into a training exercise with more aggression than skill, resulting in a clumsy misstep that left her sprawled on the ground. "But anger burns fast and leaves you empty. Purpose lasts far longer. Fight for what you wish to protect, not merely for what you wish to destroy." As Illyra's physical abilities grew, Sorka slowly began introducing the second half of her training, the part concerning the mysterious power Sorka believed lived within her. It began simply, with meditation exercises performed at dawn and dusk, moments when Sorka said the barrier between ordinary wolf and something greater grew thin and easier to sense. "Close your eyes," Sorka instructed during one such session, both of them seated quietly at the center of the training clearing as the sun began sinking below the horizon. "Focus not on the world outside you, but on the quiet space within your own chest. Somewhere in that stillness, you will find something waiting." For weeks, Illyra felt nothing during these exercises beyond simple calm, and frustration began creeping into her thoughts. "Perhaps you were wrong about me," she admitted one evening, opening her eyes after another session that yielded no results. "Perhaps I really am just an ordinary wolf who happened to survive a storm through luck alone." Sorka shook her head firmly. "Power like this does not simply appear on command, especially in someone who has spent her entire life being told to suppress and hide whatever made her different. Patience, Illyra. What you are searching for has waited generations to surface. It will not rush itself now simply because you grow impatient." The breakthrough finally came on a night several months after Illyra's arrival, during a fierce autumn storm that reminded her uncomfortably of the night she had nearly died. Rain lashed against the training clearing as thunder rolled overhead, and Sorka, rather than canceling the session, insisted they continue. "Storms carry a kind of energy," Sorka explained, raising her voice over the wind. "For some bloodlines, that energy can act as a key, unlocking what quiet meditation alone cannot reach." As lightning split the sky above them, illuminating the clearing in brief flashes of brilliant white, Illyra closed her eyes and focused inward, as she had been trained to do countless times before. This time, however, something shifted. A warmth bloomed deep in her chest, spreading outward through her limbs, growing steadily stronger with each heartbeat. Her breathing quickened, though not from exhaustion this time, but from something closer to wonder. "Elira," Sorka's voice reached her as though from a great distance. "Open your eyes." She did, and gasped. Her vision seemed sharper somehow, colors more vivid despite the darkness of the storm. Looking down at her own paws, she noticed a faint silver glow tracing along her fur, pulsing gently in rhythm with her racing heartbeat. "There you are," Sorka said softly, a note of quiet triumph in her voice. "I wondered how long it would take." Over the following months, Elira learned to summon that same warmth deliberately, without needing a storm to trigger it. Sorka taught her how to channel the strange energy into brief bursts of enhanced speed and strength, how to sense the emotional states of nearby wolves with startling clarity, and eventually, how to project a kind of calming, steadying presence that seemed to ease tension in anyone nearby who sensed it. "This is only the smallest beginning of what the old bloodline could once achieve," Sorka explained during one particularly intense training session. "Full mastery could take years, perhaps longer, but even this much already sets you apart from any ordinary wolf you are likely to encounter." As winter approached once more, nearly a full year after Elira had first arrived at the Ember Pack, half frozen and barely alive, she found herself standing taller, moving with newfound confidence, no longer the frightened, uncertain wolf who had stumbled into Sorka's care. The other members of the pack noticed the change as well. Talia, who had grown into something of a close friend over the months, often teased her about the new sharpness in her gaze. "You barely look like the same wolf who arrived here," Talia said one evening, as they shared a meal near the pack's central fire. "Even your walk has changed. You used to move like you were trying to disappear. Now you move like you belong wherever you happen to stand." Elira smiled at that, though a quieter thought lingered beneath the surface, one she had not yet shared with anyone, not even Sorka. Somewhere far to the north, Hollow Pine territory still stood, and the pack that had left her to freeze in the snow still lived their lives, likely believing she had died months ago in that storm. The thought no longer filled her with fear, the way it once might have. Instead, it stirred something steadier within her, a quiet certainty that her story with that pack was far from finished, even if she could not yet say exactly what that unfinished chapter would eventually look like. Sorka, watching from across the fire with her usual quiet perceptiveness, seemed to sense the direction of Elira's thoughts without needing to ask. Later that night, as the rest of the pack settled into sleep, Sorka approached Elira privately, near the edge of the camp. "You are thinking of them again," Sorka said simply. It was not a question. Elira did not bother denying it. "I do not know what I want from them anymore. Some nights, I think I want nothing at all, that I would rather simply forget they exist. Other nights, I think about my mother's silence, about Cade's satisfaction, and something inside me refuses to let it go so easily." Sorka nodded slowly, considering her words carefully before responding. "There is no shame in wanting resolution, Elira, whatever form that resolution eventually takes. But resolution built purely from anger tends to leave a person just as broken as the wound that caused it. If you ever choose to return to that place, make certain you do so as someone seeking justice and understanding, not merely as someone seeking to cause the same pain that was once caused to you." Elira considered those words carefully, turning them over in her mind long after Sorka had returned to her own den for the night. Standing alone at the edge of the camp, she looked out toward the northern horizon, imagining the frozen forests of Hollow Pine territory somewhere far beyond her sight, and made herself a quiet, private promise. Whatever path eventually led her back there, she would walk it as someone stronger, someone wiser, and someone no longer willing to let others decide her value for her. Behind her, the fires of the Ember Pack burned steadily against the cold night air, a small, stubborn light in the vast darkness, much like the pack itself, and much like Elira had slowly become over the past year of relentless, transformative training. Winter returned to the Ember Pack's territory with quiet, steady snowfall, nothing like the violent storm that had once nearly claimed Elira's life. She stood at the edge of the training clearing one crisp morning, watching her own breath curl into the cold air, when Sorka approached with an unusually serious expression on her face. "There is something I have not yet told you," Sorka said, settling down beside her. something I have waited to share until I believed you were ready to hear it. Illyra turned to face her fully, sensing the weight behind Sorka's words. What is it? The old Silverback bloodline was not simply a matter of hidden ability, Sorka explained. Among the ancient packs, those who carried the bloodline in its purest form were required to complete a series of trials before they could be formally recognized as leaders. These trials tested far more than strength. They tested judgment, restraint, and the willingness to place the well-being of others above personal desire. Trials administered by whom? Illyra asked. I thought you said the bloodline had been considered extinct for generations. Believed extinct, yes, but not entirely forgotten, Sorka said. I myself once carried traces of an older bloodline, weaker than yours, but similar enough that certain knowledge was passed down to me by my own teacher many years ago, including the structure of these trials. I have spent the past year preparing to guide you through them, waiting until your body and mind were strong enough to attempt what lies ahead. Illyra felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness stirring in her chest. What do these trials actually involve? Sorka rose to her feet, gesturing for Illyra to follow her deeper into the surrounding forest. There are 3, traditionally undertaken across 3 separate locations, each testing a different aspect of character. The first tests physical endurance and strength, though not through combat against another wolf, but through survival against nature itself. The second tests wisdom, requiring careful thought rather than raw power. The third, and most difficult, tests mercy, forcing the one being tested to make a choice that reveals their true character when no one is watching to judge them. They walked together for the better part of the morning, eventually arriving at the base of a steep, rocky formation that rose sharply from the surrounding forest floor. This is where your first trial begins, Sorka explained, gesturing toward the difficult climb ahead. You must reach the summit before nightfall, using only your own strength and skill, without relying on the enhanced abilities of the bloodline. This tests whether your ordinary strength alone can carry you through hardship, a reminder that true leaders must never depend entirely on extraordinary gifts. The climb proved brutal. Loose rock shifted beneath Illyra's paws with alarming frequency, and steep sections forced her to find narrow footholds while wind buffeted against her from every direction. Several times, she nearly lost her grip entirely, her heart lurching as small stones tumbled away into the distance below. She thought, more than once, of simply giving up, of calling down to Sorka that the trial was too difficult. But each time that thought surfaced, she remembered the storm that had once left her for dead, and a stubborn refusal to quit rose up to replace her doubt. By the time the sun began sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant orange, Illyra finally hauled herself over the final rocky ledge and collapsed onto the flat summit, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. Below, she could see for what felt like endless miles in every direction, forests and valleys stretching toward distant mountains still capped in snow. Sorka arrived shortly afterward, having taken a longer but less strenuous path up the far side of the formation. Well done, she said simply, though pride was clearly evident in her voice. The first trial is complete. The second trial came several weeks later, after Illyra had rested and recovered fully from the physical demands of the climb. This time, Sorka led her to a small, quiet grove deep within the forest, where an elderly, injured wolf sat waiting near a small fire, clearly a friend or acquaintance of Sorka's, arranged specifically for this purpose. This is Corwin, Sorka introduced, gesturing toward the elderly wolf. He has agreed to help with your second trial. I will explain the challenge, and then I will leave the 2 of you to work through it alone. Corwin, it turned out, presented Illyra with a difficult puzzle rather than a physical challenge. He described in careful detail a hypothetical dispute between 2 struggling packs, fighting over limited hunting grounds during a harsh winter, each side presenting reasonable arguments for why they deserved priority access to the land. Illyra was tasked with finding a solution that addressed the needs of both packs without favoring either side unfairly, using only patient conversation and careful reasoning. The exercise took the better part of an entire day, with Corwin playing devil's advocate at every turn, challenging each proposal Illyra suggested, forcing her to think more deeply and consider angles she had not initially recognized. By the time evening fell, Alira had crafted a solution involving shared rotation of the hunting grounds based on need rather than strength, along with a system of mutual aid during particularly harsh seasons, ensuring neither pack would ever face starvation while the other thrived. A fair solution, Corwin finally admitted, nodding slowly with evident approval. Not perfect, perhaps no solution involving competing interests ever truly is, but fair, and thoughtfully reasoned. That is more than many leaders, wolf or otherwise, ever manage to achieve. The third trial, however, proved to be the most difficult of all, though not for reasons Alira initially expected. Sorka led her to a small clearing near the outer edge of Ember Pack territory, where a young, injured fox lay trapped beneath a fallen tree branch, clearly in pain and struggling weakly against its situation. This fox wandered onto our territory several days ago and became trapped here, Sorka explained quietly. Your third trial is simple in appearance, though its true meaning lies deeper than it first seems. You may choose to help this creature, using time and effort that could otherwise be spent resting after your previous trials, or you may choose to leave it be, reasoning that it is not truly your responsibility, that wolves and foxes are natural rivals rather than allies. Alira looked at the frightened, injured creature struggling weakly beneath the branch, and she did not hesitate. She moved carefully toward the trapped fox, speaking in low, calming tones despite knowing the creature likely could not understand her words, and began working to shift the heavy branch, pinning it in place. The fox initially snapped weakly in fear, but Alira remained patient, moving slowly and deliberately until finally, with considerable effort, she managed to free the trapped limb. The fox scrambled backward the moment it was freed, favoring its injured leg, but otherwise able to move under its own power. It paused briefly at the edge of the clearing, looking back at Alira with something that might have been wary gratitude, before disappearing into the surrounding underbrush. Sorka, who had been watching silently from nearby, finally stepped forward with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The trial was never truly about the fox itself, she explained. It was about whether you would extend kindness to a creature that offered you nothing in return, simply because it was suffering and within your power to help. Many wolves, even good ones, hesitate in situations exactly like this, weighing the cost against the benefit before acting. You did not hesitate at all. Alira considered this for a moment, thinking back on her own experience being left to suffer in the snow, remembering how desperately she had needed someone, anyone, willing to help her without expecting anything in return. I know what it feels like to need help and receive nothing, she said quietly. I could never bring myself to be the reason someone else felt that same abandonment, not if I had the power to prevent it. Sorka's eyes softened with something close to deep pride. That, Alira, is precisely the quality that separates a true leader from a wolf who merely holds power. You have completed all 3 trials. By the old traditions, you are now formally recognized as a bearer of the Silverback bloodline, entitled to claim leadership should you ever choose to seek it. That evening, as the two of them made their way back toward the Ember Pack's central camp, beneath a sky scattered with countless stars, Alira felt a profound shift settle within her, a quiet confidence that had not existed within her even a year earlier. She was no longer merely the frightened, exiled wolf who had nearly died in a freezing storm. She had become something far stronger, forged deliberately through hardship, guided carefully by someone who genuinely believed in her potential. Yet even as pride and quiet strength filled her chest, thoughts of Hollow Pine territory continued to linger at the edges of her mind, growing steadily louder with each passing month, whispering that her transformation was not yet complete, that something important still waited for her far to the north. News of Alira's completed trials spread quickly through the small Ember Pack, and within days, a noticeable shift occurred in how the other wolves treated her. Where before she had simply been a welcomed newcomer, now she noticed subtle gestures of deference, wolves stepping aside slightly when she passed, younger pack members watching her with wide, curious eyes, as though trying to catch a glimpse of the hidden strength Sorka had spoken of during evening gatherings. Talia, however, remained refreshingly unchanged in her behavior, still teasing Alira as easily as she always had, still sharing meals and quiet conversations without any trace of newfound formality. You know, Talia said one afternoon as they walked together along a familiar forest trail, Some of the others have started calling you the Silver One, like it is some kind of grand title. I still just think of you as the wolf who once tripped over her own paws trying to learn the basic footwork drills." Alira laughed, grateful for the reminder that not everything about her needed to change, simply because something significant had shifted within her. "Please continue reminding everyone of that particular memory as often as possible. I would hate for anyone to start taking me too seriously." Despite the lighter moments, Sorka made clear that Alira's training was far from finished. Completing the 3 trials had only marked the beginning of deeper development, unlocking her formal recognition within the old traditions. But true mastery of leadership required years of continued growth, not a single defining moment. "Recognition without genuine capability is dangerous," Sorka explained during one of their now regular evening discussions near the central fire. "A pack will not follow a leader based on bloodline alone, not for long. They must see wisdom demonstrated repeatedly, strength used responsibly, fairness applied consistently. This is the work that truly builds lasting leadership, far more than any single trial ever could." Over the following seasons, Sorka began involving Alira more directly in the practical governance of the Ember Pack, allowing her to help mediate small disputes between pack members, to assist in planning hunting strategies during difficult weather, and eventually, to take a more visible role in welcoming new wolves who occasionally found their way to the pack seeking refuge, much as Alira herself once had. One such newcomer, a young male wolf named Rowan, arrived during a particularly harsh spring storm, having fled his own pack after a leadership dispute left him without a place among wolves he had once considered family. Alira found herself drawn to help him settle in, recognizing painfully familiar traces of loss and uncertainty in his cautious behavior. "It gets easier," she told him gently one evening, as they sat near the edge of camp, watching younger pack members play in a nearby clearing. "I know it does not feel that way now, but eventually, this place will start to feel like home, if you allow it to." Rowan glanced at her with quiet curiosity. "Sorka mentioned you arrived here in similar circumstances, though she did not share many details. If you do not mind me asking, what happened to you before you found this place?" Alira considered the question for a long moment, before answering honestly. "My birth pack decided I brought them misfortune, based on nothing more than superstition and fear. They sent me into a deadly storm, expecting I would not survive it. Sorka found me nearly frozen, and she gave me a second chance I never expected to receive." Rowan absorbed this quietly, his expression shifting into something between sympathy and quiet respect. "And yet here you stand, stronger than most wolves I have ever encountered. Whatever they intended by casting you out, it seems they achieved the opposite result entirely." Alira offered a small, thoughtful smile at that observation, though the words lingered with her long after their conversation ended. It was true, she realized, examining her own transformation with fresh clarity. Hollow Pine Pack had intended her destruction, yet through Sorka's guidance and her own stubborn refusal to simply disappear into the snow, she had instead become something far beyond what she had ever imagined possible for herself. As Alira's role within the Ember Pack continued to grow, so too did her physical and mental mastery over the abilities tied to her bloodline. Sorka introduced increasingly advanced training exercises, teaching her to sustain the enhanced strength and speed of her power for longer periods without exhausting herself, to extend her calming presence across larger groups during moments of tension, and eventually, to sense approaching danger with startling accuracy well before ordinary senses could detect any threat. This particular skill, Sorka explained during one especially demanding session, will prove invaluable someday, allowing you to protect not only yourself, but everyone who chooses to stand beside you. A true leader senses danger before it fully arrives, giving those under their protection precious time to prepare. During one training exercise designed specifically to test this developing sense, Sorka arranged for several Ember Pack members to approach the training clearing from different directions, without announcing themselves beforehand, challenging Alira to identify their presence purely through her heightened awareness rather than ordinary sight or scent. To Sorka's evident satisfaction, Alira successfully detected each approaching wolf well before they came into view, her senses growing sharper with continued practice. "Remarkable progress," Sorka commented afterward, though her expression carried a thoughtful seriousness that caught Alira's attention. "You continue to develop faster than even I anticipated. I suspect it will not be long before your training here reaches its natural conclusion, leaving you fully prepared for whatever path you eventually choose to walk. The words settled heavily in Alira's mind, stirring the persistent, quiet thoughts of Hollow Pine territory that had never fully left her since her arrival at the Ember Pack. She had grown to genuinely love her life among these wolves, who had welcomed her without hesitation, who valued her for who she truly was, rather than fearing her for superficial differences. Yet beneath that contentment, an unresolved thread continued pulling at her attention, growing steadier and more insistent with each passing season. One quiet evening, as autumn once again settled over the Ember Pack's territory, nearly 2 full years after Alira's arrival, she finally approached Sorka with thoughts she had been carefully considering for many months. "I have been thinking about returning to Hollow Pine territory," she admitted, watching Sorka's expression carefully for any reaction. "Not for revenge, though I will not pretend the thought has never crossed my mind during difficult moments. I keep thinking of the pack members, who had no real say in what happened to me. Wolves like Fenna, who tried to speak reason into a gathering consumed by fear. I think about pups being raised right now under leadership that punishes difference rather than understanding it. I cannot simply forget that this continues happening, even while I have found peace and strength here." Sorka listened patiently, nodding slowly as Alira spoke. "I wondered when this conversation would finally arrive," she said, once Alira finished. "I will not pretend the choice ahead of you is simple. Returning carries genuine risk, both to your own safety and to the peace you have worked so hard to build for yourself here. But I have never believed in holding someone back from a path their own conscience clearly calls them toward. Would you come with me?" Alira asked, though she suspected she already knew Sorka's likely answer. Sorka's expression softened with quiet affection. "My place has always been here, guiding those who need guidance, much as I once guided you. But that does not mean you would walk this path entirely alone. The Ember Pack has grown strong under years of careful building, Alira. Should you choose to return to Hollow Pine territory, you would not return merely as a single exiled wolf seeking closure. You would return as someone capable of leading others, someone who has earned genuine loyalty rather than mere obligation." Alira considered these words carefully throughout the following weeks, watching the pack she had come to consider family with fresh appreciation, recognizing the strength, unity, and genuine care that defined the Ember Pack in ways Hollow Pine had never fully managed to achieve, even during better seasons. Slowly, a plan began forming in her mind, not one built purely from anger or desire for confrontation, but one grounded in the quiet, steady purpose Sorka had worked so hard to instill within her from the very beginning of her training. She would return to Hollow Pine territory. But when that day finally came, she intended to arrive not as the frightened, exiled wolf who had once been cast aside without protest, but as someone entirely transformed, someone capable of standing before her former pack and demanding, at long last, the respect and fairness she had always deserved. The decision to eventually return to Hollow Pine territory did not mean Alira rushed toward that goal without careful preparation. Sorka insisted on several more months of intensive training, determined that when the day finally came for Alira to face her former pack, she would arrive not only emotionally ready, but fully capable of handling whatever challenges that confrontation might bring. Confidence without genuine preparation is simply recklessness, wearing a more flattering name, Sorka reminded her during one particularly grueling training session, as Alira worked to master a new technique involving rapid bursts of enhanced speed, combined with precise defensive movements. "I will not send you toward that reunion until I am certain you can handle whatever reaction awaits you there, whether that reaction proves welcoming or hostile." During this period, Alira also began taking on a more formal leadership role within the Ember Pack itself, partly at Sorka's encouragement and partly from her own growing recognition that practical leadership experience would prove invaluable before facing Hollow Pine again. She organized hunting parties with increasing confidence, settled minor disputes between pack members with fairness that quickly earned their trust, and gradually became someone the younger wolves specifically sought out for guidance and reassurance. Rowan, the young wolf who had arrived seeking refuge months earlier, proved particularly perceptive about the changes taking shape within Alira during this period. "You are practicing," he observed one afternoon, watching her calmly resolve a disagreement between two pack members over hunting territory boundaries. Not just leading because Sorka asked you to, but genuinely preparing yourself for something larger. Illyra did not deny the observation. I need to know that when I finally stand before Hollow Pine, I am not simply reacting out of old wounds, but leading with the same steadiness I hope to demonstrate here, every single day. As winter approached once more, Sorka called a private meeting with Illyra, her expression carrying unusual seriousness, even by her typically composed standards. There is one final matter we must address before I consider your preparation complete, she said, settling across from Illyra near the warmth of the central fire. The old traditions state that a bearer of the Silverback bloodline, upon completing the required trials, may formally establish or lead a pack of their own, provided they can demonstrate genuine, freely given loyalty from those who choose to follow them. Illyra frowned slightly, uncertain where this explanation was heading. I do not fully understand what you mean. Sorka continued patiently. If you intend to return to Hollow Pine territory and eventually assume any position of leadership there, whether through negotiation or through simple, undeniable demonstration of your rightful claim, you cannot arrive as a single wolf alone, regardless of how skilled you have become individually. Leadership recognized by tradition requires a pack willing to stand behind that claim, wolves who follow not from fear or obligation, but from genuine trust and respect. You are suggesting the Ember Pack itself might formally follow me, Illyra said slowly, beginning to understand the full weight of what Sorka was proposing. I am suggesting that decision belongs entirely to each individual wolf within this pack, not to you or to me, Sorka clarified. But I do believe, having watched you closely these past 2 years, that many among us would choose to stand with you, should you ask them honestly, and allow them the freedom to decide for themselves. That evening, Sorka called a full gathering of the Ember Pack, larger and more formal than their usual evening gatherings around the central fire. Every member of the pack attended, from the eldest wolves who had helped Sorka establish the pack many years earlier, to the youngest pups born within the past season. Illyra stood nervously near the center of the gathering as Sorka addressed the assembled wolves. Many of you already know the story of how Illyra came to join us, Sorka began, her voice carrying easily across the quiet clearing. You have watched her grow from a wolf, nearly destroyed by cruelty and fear, into someone who now carries genuine strength, wisdom, and fairness in equal measure. Tonight, she faces a difficult choice, one that may eventually lead her back toward the territory that once cast her aside, not for vengeance, but to correct injustices that continue there even now. A murmur rippled through the gathered wolves, curious glances shifting toward Illyra, who forced herself to stand tall, despite the sudden weight of so many eyes upon her. I will not pretend this path holds no risk, Sorka continued, nor will I pretend I know precisely how matters will unfold, should Illyra choose to walk it. But I believe in her judgment, her fairness, and her genuine desire to build something better than what she once endured. Tonight, I ask each of you honestly, without any pressure or obligation, whether you would choose to stand alongside her should that day eventually arrive. Silence held the clearing for a long, tense moment. Then, slowly, Talia stepped forward first, her expression resolute despite her youth. I would follow her, she said simply. She has never once treated me as anything less than an equal, even when others might have dismissed me for my age or inexperience. Rowan followed shortly after, along with several other wolves Illyra had come to know, well over her years within the pack, each offering brief, sincere reasons for their willingness to stand beside her. Not every wolf stepped forward that evening, and Sorka made clear that those who chose to remain behind, continuing their lives within the Ember Pack's established territory, faced no judgment whatsoever for that decision. By the time the gathering concluded, a meaningful number of Ember Pack wolves, roughly a third of the entire pack, had voluntarily pledged their willingness to eventually follow Illyra, should she choose to move forward with her plans regarding Hollow Pine territory. Illyra found herself deeply moved by the display, humbled that so many wolves who owed her nothing beyond simple friendship and mutual respect, would willingly choose to stand beside her in an uncertain, potentially dangerous undertaking. I did not expect this, she admitted quietly to Sorka, once the gathering had dispersed, and the clearing grew quiet once more. I assumed, if anyone agreed to help at all, it would be out of loyalty to you, rather than genuine belief in me. Sorka shook her head gently. You continue underestimating the impression you have made over these past 2 years, Alira. These wolves do not follow you out of obligation to me. They follow you because they have witnessed firsthand exactly the kind of leader you have become. Over the following weeks, preparations began in earnest for the eventual journey toward Hollow Pine territory, though Sorka insisted the timing remain flexible, dependent on continued readiness, rather than any arbitrary deadline. Alira spent additional months refining her leadership skills, strengthening bonds with those who had pledged to follow her, and continuing her physical and mental training under Sorka's careful supervision. During this period, Alira also formally accepted the title, long implied, but never officially spoken aloud within the pack, becoming recognized among those who chose to follow her as their leader, their queen, in the old tradition of the Silverback bloodline. The formal recognition carried genuine weight, marking the culmination of everything she had endured and everything she had built since that terrible night nearly 2 years earlier, when Hollow Pine Pack had left her for dead in the freezing snow. Standing once more atop the same ridge overlooking the valley, where Sorka had first explained the truth of her bloodline, Alira found herself reflecting on just how completely her life had transformed. The frightened, uncertain wolf who had once walked silently into a deadly storm no longer existed in any meaningful sense. In her place stood someone entirely new, forged through hardship, guided by genuine wisdom, and now supported by wolves who had chosen her freely, without any obligation beyond honest respect and trust. The time for her eventual return to Hollow Pine territory drew steadily closer, and for the first time since that terrible night in the snow, Alira found herself facing the prospect not with fear or uncertainty, but with quiet, steady resolve. Far to the north, within the boundaries of Hollow Pine territory, life had not improved in the years since Alira's exile, despite the pack's desperate hope that removing her would somehow reverse their ongoing misfortune. If anything, conditions had grown steadily worse, as though the hardship they had blamed on a single wolf's presence had never truly been connected to her at all. Bram, the aging alpha, had grown increasingly frail over the past 2 winters, his once steady leadership faltering under the combined weight of guilt he refused to openly acknowledge, and physical decline that no longer allowed him to lead hunting parties as he once had. Authority within the pack had gradually shifted toward Cade, who finally assumed full leadership when Bram formally stepped aside during a difficult gathering held at the end of the previous winter. Cade's leadership, however, proved far less effective than his confident bearing had once suggested it would be. Where Bram, despite his flaws, had genuinely cared about the well-being of his pack, Cade seemed far more concerned with maintaining his own authority and status, often making decisions that benefited himself and his closest allies, while leaving the wider pack to struggle with diminishing resources. Fenna, the healer who had once spoken against Alira's exile, watched these developments with growing concern, though her position within the pack had grown increasingly precarious under Cade's rule. She had never fully accepted the official explanation regarding Alira's fate, and privately, she continued caring for Meredith, Alira's mother, who had withdrawn significantly from pack life since that terrible winter night, rarely speaking, rarely participating in gatherings beyond what was strictly necessary. "You still think of her," Fenna said quietly one afternoon, finding Meredith sitting alone near the edge of the territory, staring out toward the distant tree line, as she often did during quiet moments. Meredith did not turn to face her. "Every single day," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tell myself there was nothing I could have done, that speaking against the gathering would have accomplished nothing beyond risking my own position within the pack. But I know, deep down, that reasoning is simply an excuse I have built to avoid facing what I actually did, which was choose silence over my own daughter's life." Fenna settled quietly beside her, offering no easy reassurance, recognizing that Meredith's guilt, however painful, was not something that could be simply talked away. "For what it is worth," Fenna finally said, "I do not believe she died in that storm. I have no proof beyond instinct, but something tells me Alira found a way to survive." Meredith turned to look at her then, something flickering behind her tired eyes that might have been fragile, desperate hope. What makes you believe that? Call it an old healer's intuition, Fenna said simply. I spent enough time around that girl to recognize a strength in her that this pack never properly valued. I do not think a simple winter storm was ever going to be enough to end someone like her. Word of a mysterious new pack rising somewhere far to the south first reached Hollow Pine territory nearly 2.5 years after Alira's exile, carried initially through scattered rumors, exchanged during rare encounters with traveling wolves passing through the region. The stories varied considerably in detail, but certain elements remained consistent across every version. Tales of a powerful leader, with fur the color of frost and silver, someone said to command loyalty through fairness rather than fear. Someone whose growing pack had reportedly begun absorbing smaller struggling groups throughout the southern territories, offering protection and stability in exchange for genuine cooperation rather than forced submission. Cade, upon hearing these rumors during a gathering meant to discuss the pack's continuing struggles with dwindling hunting grounds, dismissed the stories immediately with visible irritation. Travelers' tales grow more exaggerated with every retelling, he said sharply, cutting off further discussion on the matter. We have far more pressing concerns than rumors of some mysterious silver wolf, building influence in territories that have nothing to do with our own struggles. Fenna, however, could not shake the growing suspicion forming in her mind as additional details continued filtering northward over the following months. The description of fur the color of frost and silver struck her with particular significance, memories of Alira's own distinctive coloring rising sharply to the forefront of her thoughts each time she heard the rumors repeated. She approached Meredith privately one evening, finding her once again sitting alone near the territory's edge. I do not wish to offer you false hope, Fenna began carefully, but I believe you should hear what continues to circulate among traveling wolves regarding this new southern pack and its leader. Meredith listened intently as Fenna carefully relayed everything she had gathered, her expression shifting through disbelief, cautious hope, and finally something approaching desperate longing. It could simply be coincidence, Meredith said slowly, though her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Silver fur is uncommon, but not entirely unheard of among wolves. It could be coincidence, Fenna agreed gently, but I do not believe it is. Something in these stories feels connected to her, Meredith. I cannot fully explain why I believe this so strongly, but I do. As months continued passing, the rumors regarding the mysterious southern pack grew increasingly difficult to dismiss entirely, even for wolves like Cade, who preferred not to acknowledge them. Several smaller packs within neighboring territories had reportedly chosen, entirely voluntarily according to the stories, to align themselves under this new leadership, drawn by accounts of fair resource sharing and effective, thoughtful governance during difficult seasons, qualities increasingly absent from Hollow Pine's own struggling leadership under Cade. Meanwhile, conditions within Hollow Pine territory continued deteriorating. Poor hunting decisions under Cade's leadership left the pack facing severe food shortages as another harsh winter approached. Tensions within the pack grew increasingly strained, with several younger wolves privately questioning Cade's competence, though few dared voice such concerns openly, given his quick temper and increasingly authoritarian handling of any dissent. Ivy, a young pup born during the same difficult season that had witnessed Alira's exile, grew up hearing whispered fragments of the story surrounding the silver-furred wolf, who had once been driven from the pack, pieced together from careful listening during conversations adults believed occurred beyond her hearing. She found herself strangely fascinated by these fragments, unable to fully understand why a story from before her own birth continued affecting the pack's collective mood so significantly, particularly whenever new rumors arrived regarding the mysterious southern leader. Do you think she is really out there somewhere? Ivy asked Fenna one afternoon, having sought out the healer specifically hoping for honest answers, rather than the vague, uncomfortable silence most adults offered whenever the topic arose. Fenna considered the question carefully before answering. I believe there is a very good chance of it, yes. And if she is indeed out there, building the kind of pack these stories describe, then perhaps someday we will have the opportunity to see her again, and perhaps this pack will finally have the chance to properly address what happened all those years ago. Ivy absorbed this thoughtfully, young enough to feel genuine curiosity, rather than the complicated guilt and denial that colored so many of the adults' reactions to similar rumors. "I hope she comes back," she said simply. "It does not seem fair what happened to her, even though I never actually knew her." Fenna smiled gently at the pup's straightforward honesty, wishing more of the pack's adults could approach the matter with such uncomplicated clarity. "No," she agreed quietly. "It certainly was not fair at all." As winter deepened once more over Hollow Pine territory, bringing renewed hardship and mounting tension throughout the struggling pack, rumors regarding the mysterious southern leader continued growing steadily stronger, no longer easily dismissed as simple travelers' exaggeration. Something significant was clearly building far beyond their borders, and though few within Hollow Pine dared speak the possibility openly, an uneasy sense began settling over the entire territory that whatever was approaching from the south might soon arrive far closer to home than any of them were fully prepared to face. Within the growing territory now firmly established under Alira's leadership, the decision to finally move toward Hollow Pine had been carefully weighed for many weeks. Sorka, though she had chosen to remain behind and continue guiding the Ember Pack's original territory, traveled personally to meet with Alira as final preparations for the journey north were being finalized. "You have built something remarkable here," Sorka said, surveying the organized activity throughout the growing settlement Alira now led. Wolves moving purposefully between shared hunting duties, younger pups training under patient supervision, disputes settled calmly through the fair systems Alira had established over the preceding months. "I confess, even I did not fully anticipate how quickly your leadership would flourish once given the opportunity to develop naturally. None of this would exist without everything you taught me," Alira replied honestly. "I still feel, some days, as though I am simply following the example you set, rather than leading in any way uniquely my own." Sorka shook her head firmly. Every leader eventually develops their own approach, shaped by their own experiences and values. What you have built here carries your particular understanding of fairness, earned through everything you endured. That is not imitation, Alira. That is genuine growth. The following morning, Alira gathered those who had chosen to accompany her northward, a substantial group numbering nearly 40 wolves, including Talia and Rowan, among the most trusted of her closest companions. Standing before them in the pale early light, Alira addressed the group with the same calm steadiness that had become characteristic of her leadership over the preceding years. "I want to be completely clear about our purpose in traveling to Hollow Pine territory," she said, her voice carrying easily across the assembled group. "We do not travel there seeking violence or revenge against those who wronged me years ago. We travel there because I believe innocent wolves, pups being raised right now under struggling leadership, deserve better than what continues happening in that territory. Whatever confrontation eventually occurs, I intend to handle it through strength demonstrated calmly and fairly, not through unnecessary conflict." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered wolves, many of whom had heard variations of this explanation many times throughout the preceding months of preparation, but who clearly still found reassurance in hearing it directly from Alira herself before beginning such a significant undertaking. The journey northward stretched across nearly 2 full weeks, the group moving steadily through unfamiliar territories, occasionally encountering smaller packs along the way who, upon recognizing Alira's now widely recognized silver coloring and hearing confirmation of her identity, often expressed genuine curiosity or quiet respect rather than hostility. Word of her fair leadership and growing influence had clearly spread far beyond what Alira had initially realized, smaller struggling packs increasingly viewing her as a potential source of stability rather than a threat to their own territorial claims. As the group drew closer to the familiar landscape surrounding Hollow Pine territory, Alira found herself experiencing a complicated mixture of emotions she had not fully anticipated, despite years of preparation. The forests grew increasingly recognizable with each passing day, memories of her childhood surfacing unexpectedly at the sight of particular rock formations or distinctive groves of trees she had once explored as a young, uncertain pup trying desperately to earn acceptance from a pack that had never truly valued her. Talia, walking closely beside her during these final days of travel, noticed the shifting emotions playing across Alira's expression. "Are you certain you feel ready for this?" she asked quietly, careful to keep her voice from carrying to the rest of the traveling group. "No one would think less of you if you needed more time before finally facing them." Elira considered the question seriously before answering. I do not know if anyone can ever feel completely ready to confront something like this. But I know that continuing to wait will not make the confrontation any easier, and innocent wolves within that territory continue suffering under poor leadership the longer I delay. Readiness, I have learned, sometimes simply means choosing to move forward, despite remaining uncertainty. As they finally approached the outer boundaries of Hollow Pine territory, Elira called the group to a halt, allowing herself several quiet moments to fully absorb the significance of standing once more at the edge of the land that had once cast her out to die. The forest here looked almost exactly as she remembered it. The same distinctive pine trees, the same rocky outcroppings marking the traditional territorial boundary, and yet everything about her own presence there now felt entirely transformed from the frightened, uncertain wolf who had once walked this same ground in the opposite direction, driven out into a deadly storm. "We will make camp here for tonight," Elira announced to the gathered group, gesturing toward a clearing just beyond the territorial boundary. "Tomorrow, at first light, we will make our presence known to Hollow Pine directly, rather than allowing rumors and uncertainty to continue building unnecessary tension." That evening, as the traveling wolves settled into their temporary camp, Elira found herself unable to fully rest, drawn instead toward the edge of the clearing where she could look out over the darkened forest separating her from the pack she had once called family. Rowan found her there sometime after moonrise, standing quietly and staring northward with an unreadable expression. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Rowan said, settling beside her without requiring invitation, "you should know that every wolf who chose to travel here with you did so because we genuinely believe in what you represent, not merely out of obligation or curiosity. Whatever reception awaits us tomorrow, you do not face it alone." Elira offered a small, grateful smile, though her thoughts remained heavily occupied by the uncertainty of what tomorrow would actually bring. She thought of her mother, wondering whether Meredith still lived within the pack, wondering how she might react upon seeing her daughter again after believing her dead for so many years. She thought of Fenna, hoping the healer's earlier kindness had not led to difficulties within the pack following her exile. And she thought of Cade, wondering how his leadership had shaped Hollow Pine over the intervening years, and how he might respond to her unexpected, undeniable return. "Try to rest," Rowan suggested gently, sensing the weight of her thoughts without needing further explanation. "Tomorrow will require every bit of the strength and clarity you have worked so hard to build over these past years." Elira nodded slowly, though sleep remained elusive for much of that night, her mind cycling through countless possible scenarios for how the following day's confrontation might unfold. Yet beneath the uncertainty, a steady core of calm determination remained firmly in place, the product of years of careful preparation, unwavering support from those who had chosen to stand beside her, and a clear, unwavering sense of purpose that had guided every step of her long journey back toward this moment. As dawn finally began breaking over the eastern horizon, casting pale golden light across the familiar forest of her childhood, Elira rose to meet the day ahead, fully aware that whatever unfolded within the coming hours would mark the true culmination of everything she had endured and everything she had become since that terrible winter night when Hollow Pine Pack had left her alone in the freezing snow, never expecting to see her again. The morning air felt sharp and clean as Elira led her group across the final stretch, separating their camp from the heart of Hollow Pine territory. Word of their approach had apparently already reached the pack, likely spotted by scouts posted along the territorial boundary, because by the time Elira's group reached the familiar central gathering clearing, a considerable crowd of Hollow Pine wolves had already assembled, watching the approaching strangers with a mixture of confusion, apprehension, and growing recognition. Elira walked at the front of her group with steady, deliberate confidence, her silver fur catching the morning light in a way that immediately drew murmurs and whispers rippling through the assembled Hollow Pine wolves. She recognized several faces immediately, wolves she had grown up alongside, elders who had once voted to send her into that deadly storm, and finally, standing near the center of the gathering with an expression shifting rapidly from confusion to stunned disbelief, Cade himself. "It cannot be," someone murmured from within the crowd, though Elira could not immediately identify the voice. "Elira," Cade finally said, his voice carrying an unsteady quality, entirely absent from the confident cruelty he had once displayed the night of her exile. "You are supposed to be dead." "I was supposed to be many things, according to this pack," Elira replied evenly, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "Cursed, dangerous, a burden unworthy of protection. It seems this pack's judgment regarding my fate proved considerably less accurate than everyone assumed that night." A wave of uncertain murmuring spread through the crowd as more wolves began recognizing her fully, memories of that terrible winter night clearly resurfacing throughout the gathered pack. Near the edge of the crowd, Elira spotted Fenna, the healer's expression shifting rapidly from disbelief into something closer to overwhelming relief and quiet vindication. Then, pushing gently through the assembled wolves, came a figure Elira had thought about every single day since her exile, though she had never fully allowed herself to hope for this particular moment. Meredith stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, staring at her daughter as though afraid the vision before her might simply vanish if she blinked. "Elira," Meredith whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. For a long moment, Elira simply looked at her mother, years of complicated emotion rising to the surface all at once, hurt and longing and cautious hope, all tangled together within her chest. She had rehearsed countless versions of this potential encounter during the long journey northward, yet none of those imagined scenarios fully prepared her for the actual weight of standing before her mother again after so many years of believed loss. "I am here," Elira finally said, her voice softer now, though still carrying enough strength to remain steady. "I survived, Mother. Despite everything, I survived, and I built something far greater than anyone in this pack ever believed possible for me." Meredith took several hesitant steps forward, tears clearly visible in her eyes, despite her obvious effort to maintain composure in front of the watching crowd. "I have carried guilt over what happened to you every single day since that night. I should have spoken against it. I should have fought for you. I failed you completely when you needed me most." "You did," Elira agreed honestly, unwilling to offer false reassurance simply to ease the moment's discomfort. "That failure hurt me deeply, more than I think I can fully express. But I did not travel all this way seeking to relive old pain without purpose. I came because this pack continues making the same mistakes that once nearly cost me my life, and I refuse to stand by silently while others suffer under the same kind of fear and poor leadership." Cade, recovering somewhat from his initial shock, stepped forward with obvious effort to reassert some measure of authority despite his clearly shaken composure. "Whatever you have become, whatever strange power apparently allowed you to survive that storm, you no longer belong to this pack. You were exiled. That decision remains final, regardless of how impressive your current circumstances might appear." Elira turned her full attention toward him, and something in her steady, unwavering gaze seemed to make Cade instinctively take a half-step backward despite his attempt at continued authority. "I did not return seeking readmission to a pack that never valued me, Cade. I returned because I now lead a pack of my own, built entirely on fairness and genuine strength, rather than fear and superstition, and I have watched, even from a distance, how badly Hollow Pine continues struggling under your particular brand of leadership." Murmurs of agreement, quiet but unmistakable, rippled through several sections of the crowd, confirming what Elira had already suspected, based on the visibly strained, exhausted appearance of many pack members gathered before her. Thin frames, worn expressions, and the general atmosphere of quiet desperation told a clear story of continued hardship under Cade's leadership, hardship that clearly had never been connected to Elira's presence or absence at all. "You have no authority here," Cade insisted, though his voice carried far less conviction than his words attempted to project. "I claim no authority over this pack through force," Elira replied calmly. "But by the old traditions of the bloodline I carry, traditions this pack itself once whispered about in stories told to frightened pups, I have completed every trial required to formally claim leadership recognition, should I ever choose to seek it. I do not need to force anything upon this pack, Cade. I simply need this pack to finally see clearly what it refused to recognize years ago." Osric, the elderly wolf who had originally proposed sending Elira into the deadly storm, pushed forward through the crowd, his aged expression carrying obvious shock and something that might have been reluctant recognition of his own past mistake. "The Silverback bloodline," he murmured, studying Alira's silver fur with renewed understanding. "I dismissed such possibilities as nothing more than old legend. I never imagined. You never imagined. Because fear made it easier to believe the worst about someone different, rather than considering the possibility of something extraordinary," Alira finished for him, though her tone carried more weight of simple truth than harsh accusation. "That same fear nearly cost this entire pack a leader who might have guided you toward genuine stability, rather than the continued struggle you currently endure." The crowd remained largely silent, absorbing the full weight of what was unfolding before them, watching as the wolf they had once condemned to certain death stood before them now, clearly thriving, clearly commanding the loyal support of dozens of wolves who had traveled willingly alongside her, clearly carrying herself with an authority and calm strength that instantly outshone anything Cade's leadership had managed to project during his time as Alpha. Bram, frail and moving slowly with the visible effects of his physical decline, finally made his way to the front of the gathered crowd, his expression carrying deep, complicated emotion as he looked upon the wolf he had once formally condemned to the deadly storm. "I made the decision that sent you away," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly with age and evident guilt. "Whatever explanation I offer will never undo what happened that night, but I am glad, more than I can properly express, that you survived, despite everything this pack did to prevent it." Alira studied the once powerful Alpha, now standing frail and humbled before her, and something within her chest softened slightly, though her core resolve remained entirely unshaken. "I did not return seeking apologies alone, Bram, though I recognize the sincerity in yours. I returned because this pack requires genuine change that clearly has not occurred under the leadership that replaced yours." As the tension within the clearing continued building, every wolf present sensing that something significant and irreversible was unfolding before them, Cade made one final, desperate attempt to maintain his authority. "This pack does not answer to outsiders, regardless of bloodline claims or dramatic returns," he snarled, though the confidence behind his words had clearly crumbled considerably since the confrontation began. "I remain Alpha here, and I will not simply step aside because of old legends and theatrical demonstrations." Alira met his challenge with unwavering calm, her voice carrying clearly across the now completely silent clearing. "Then perhaps this pack should decide for themselves, Cade, exactly which leadership they wish to follow, rather than allowing either of us to simply claim authority through words alone." Silence stretched across the clearing following Alira's challenge, every wolf present understanding the significance of what was being asked of them. Cade turned slowly, scanning the crowd of his own pack members, searching for the support and loyalty he had always assumed belonged automatically to him, simply by virtue of his position as Alpha. What he found instead was a gathering of exhausted, uncertain wolves, many of whom had clearly grown weary of struggling under leadership that consistently prioritized personal authority over genuine care for the pack's well-being. Fenna stepped forward first, breaking the tense silence with quiet, deliberate courage. "I spoke against the decision to exile Alira years ago, and I was overruled by fear and desperation," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its measured softness. "I will not make that same mistake twice. I have watched this pack struggle for 2 years, under leadership that offers little beyond continued hardship and increasing division. Whatever Alira has become, whatever strength or wisdom she now carries, I choose to trust in that, rather than continue accepting the current path this pack has followed." Cade's expression darkened considerably at Fenna's words, though he said nothing immediately, clearly recognizing that further argument might only strengthen the growing shift in sentiment spreading visibly through the crowd. Meredith moved forward next, standing beside Fenna with tears still visible in her eyes, though her voice carried newfound steadiness despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I failed my daughter once through silence and fear. I refuse to fail her, or this pack, a second time. Whatever judgment this gathering makes today, know that I stand fully behind Alira's return, and behind the leadership she has clearly proven herself capable of providing." One by one, additional voices rose from within the crowd. Wolves who had grown increasingly disillusioned with Cade's leadership finding, In Alira's unexpected return, sudden courage to finally voice concerns they had long kept carefully hidden out of fear or uncertainty. Even several wolves who had actively supported Alira's original exile years earlier found themselves reconsidering their position entirely, faced with undeniable evidence of her strength, wisdom, and the genuine loyalty she commanded among those who had chosen to travel alongside her. Osric, the elderly elder whose original proposal had led directly to Alira's exile, finally spoke again, his aged voice carrying genuine remorse, rather than his earlier startled recognition. "I proposed the trial that sent you into that storm, believing at the time I was protecting this pack from misfortune," he said, meeting Alira's steady gaze directly, despite his obvious discomfort. "I was wrong, completely and inexcusably wrong. If there remains any way to correct that grave error, I would ask that this pack seriously consider it, regardless of my own role in creating the original injustice." Cade, watching his authority crumble visibly before him, made one final attempt to reassert control, his voice rising with obvious desperation. "This is madness. You would replace proven leadership with someone who abandoned this pack years ago, someone whose only claim to authority rests on old legends and unverified bloodline stories?" "I did not abandon this pack," Alira replied firmly, though without raising her own voice to match his rising desperation. "This pack cast me out, deliberately, and with full awareness of the likely consequences. I have returned not seeking revenge for that injustice, but seeking to ensure it never happens again to anyone else within this territory, and to offer genuine leadership, capable of restoring the stability and fairness this pack has clearly lost under your guidance." The crowd's sentiment, already shifting heavily throughout the confrontation, reached its clear conclusion as Ivy, the young pup who had grown up hearing fragmented whispers of Alira's story, pushed her way to the front of the gathering, with surprising boldness for one so young. "I want to follow her," Ivy said simply, her clear young voice somehow cutting through the tension more effectively than any of the adult voices that had spoken before her. "Everyone always talked about her like she did something wrong, but she is the one who got hurt. I do not understand why anyone would choose to keep following the wolf who let that happen instead." The pup's straightforward honesty seemed to crystallize the sentiment already building steadily throughout the gathered crowd, and one by one, wolves began stepping forward, some kneeling directly before Alira in the traditional gesture of formal submission to acknowledged leadership, others simply moving to stand alongside her existing followers, silently declaring their allegiance through action rather than words. Cade watched, increasingly isolated, as pack member after pack member turned away from his leadership toward the wolf he had once helped condemn to certain death. His closest allies, sensing the overwhelming shift in sentiment, gradually distanced themselves as well, unwilling to remain visibly aligned with a leader whose authority had so completely and publicly collapsed. Finally, standing nearly alone before the assembled pack, Cade's shoulders slumped with the unmistakable weight of total, undeniable defeat. Slowly, without further protest, he lowered himself into the same traditional gesture of submission now being offered throughout the clearing, acknowledging, however reluctantly, the leadership he could no longer credibly deny. Alira looked out over the assembled pack, watching as even the elders who had once condemned her, even Bram, who had formally ordered her exile, knelt before her in quiet, genuine acknowledgement of everything she had overcome and everything she had rightfully become. The moment carried a complicated mixture of vindication and lingering sorrow, memories of that terrible winter night, never fully erased, despite the profound transformation this moment represented. "Rise," she finally said, her voice carrying gently across the silent clearing. "I do not wish for this pack to kneel out of fear or forced submission, the same fear that once drove you to nearly destroy me. I wish for genuine partnership, built on fairness, honesty, and mutual respect, the same values that allowed me to build something meaningful during my years away from this territory." Slowly, the assembled wolves rose to their feet, watching Alira, with expressions ranging from relief to genuine hope for the future ahead. Over the following weeks, Alira worked carefully alongside both her original followers and the Hollow Pine wolves who had chosen to embrace her leadership, gradually rebuilding the struggling pack's resources, restructuring failing hunting strategies, and slowly repairing the deep divisions that years of fear and poor leadership had created throughout the territory. Meredith and Alira spent many long evenings together during this period, slowly rebuilding a relationship strained by years of guilt and unspoken hurt, neither pretending the past could be fully erased, but both genuinely committed to building something stronger moving forward. Fenna became one of Alira's closest advisors, her earlier courage in speaking against the original exile, finally recognized and valued as the pack settled into its new, more stable direction. Kade, stripped of his former authority but not driven away entirely, was given the opportunity to remain within the pack under Alira's leadership, provided he demonstrated genuine willingness to contribute constructively rather than continue seeking personal power at the expense of others. Whether he would ultimately embrace that opportunity or eventually choose to leave remained uncertain, though Alira made clear she held no interest in cruelty or unnecessary punishment, only in ensuring the pack's continued well-being moving forward. As seasons passed and Hollow Pine territory slowly transformed under its new leadership, stability and genuine prosperity gradually returned to a pack that had struggled for years under fear and poor decision-making. Alira, now firmly established as the rightful queen of a united, strengthened pack, combining the best qualities of both her original Hollow Pine upbringing and the hard-won wisdom of her years in exile, often found herself standing at the same forest edge where her mother had once kept solitary, guilt-ridden vigil, though now the view carried only quiet peace rather than lingering sorrow. The wolf who had once been left alone to freeze in the snow, dismissed and abandoned by the very pack meant to protect her, had returned not through vengeance or destruction, but through patient strength, genuine wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to fairness that ultimately proved far more powerful than fear or cruelty ever could. And throughout the territory she now guided with quiet, steady confidence. Every wolf who had once turned their back on her understood clearly, at long last, exactly what they had nearly lost, and exactly what remarkable strength had grown from the very cruelty that once tried so completely to destroy her.